The time has come for my people to go.
I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's what the people demand. We gonna keep fighting till we get that land. I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's time to rise to get what we want. We got to organize.
Welcome to the Pantsula Podcast, presented by the Kaji Work Study Circle. We're part of the A-APRP, All African People's Revolutionary Party. Our goal is Pan-Africanism, in which we define Pan-Africanism as one united, liberated socialist Africa, Africa under scientific socialism. I'm here. My name's Evan. I'm here with my comrade Jamilah. She's back home.
Well, I'm not home, but I'm back in my house.
Well, back home, but not home. Like we're on the motherland.
Yeah. I am. And today's episode, we are discussing how Africans are anti-fascist. Africans have always been anti-fascist. And we are dedicating this episode to Kenneth Kaunda and Olive Morris. So I'll talk about Olive Morris a little bit. And this one is kind of close to my heart because being from New York City and somewhat being like, I wasn't like a total squatter, but being adjacent to the squatters movement, and of course, being a teenager and having a burgeoning political analysis in regards to capitalism. And so knowing about Olive Morris is just like, yeah. She was also a nationalist, you say African, but Black nationalist. And she, in the 1970s, she was a huge part of a squatters' rights campaign. So I'm like, yeah, because we have to understand this land is not ours. And I think that what squatting means to people who are colonized is very different than what squatting means to folks who are European. And so, of course, I was in the punk and hardcore scenes. There were a ton of squatters, but I understood that, you are in this place which was not occupied and you make your own electricity, and people are like, well, what about codes or whatever? I've seen better electricity in squats than I've seen in some places that are supposed to have codes. So just the squatters' rights movement, just having that be part of the anti-capitalist movement, it was a thing that was close to my heart. And so she's also an organizer in the Black women's movement in the UK. She also co-founded the Organization of Women of African and Asian Descent in London, as well as Manchester. And Olive Morris, amazing work. And all that work from our sisters, from non-men, from non-binary folks, from marginalized genders, needs to be acknowledged. When people talk about a lot of this work that's being done, it's usually men. People can name off men, but when you talk about, okay, are there any sisters in the movement, any non-men, people, can name maybe one or two. So we're here to honor everyone, regardless of what their gender is, but we do want to highlight the work of people of marginalized genders, women, non-men, non-binary, etc., trans folks. So Olive Morris. So do you want to talk about Kenneth Kaunda?
Yes.
Kaunda. I'm sorry, Kenneth Kaunda.
So if you're familiar with Kenneth Kaunda, he recently rejoined the Ancestors a couple of weeks ago. He was the first president of Zambia. He was Pan-Africanist. He had also worked with the other national liberation movements within Southern Africa, the liberation movement in Zimbabwe, what was then Rhodesia, so-called Rhodesia, and Azania, so-called South Africa, Mozambique, Angola, and so on. So it was a real one, and yeah, and if you haven't read about him or know him compared to some of the other national liberation leaders or such, please do so, because amazing. So on that note, and one of the things, and since we talk about how Africans were anti-fascist, one of the things and that transitions well to some of the liberation movements, some of the African liberation movements they were fighting against. Some people might not call them the fascist movements, but if you look at some of the politics of, say, the National Party regime in so-called South Africa, or the Ian Smith-led government of the white settlers, and was what they called Rhodesia, along with of course the fascist government in Portugal that colonized Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Cape Verde. So when they were fighting for their liberation, it was also a fight against fascism. And you want to go more in detail on that?
We talk about fascism. It's something for colonized folks that's been going on. If we want to talk about this country, since the foundation of this country. And in other places, you started to see fascism at the height of Western imperialism and then neo-colonialism. And the fascism you're seeing on this end, particularly with the US and with Britain, you saw with neoliberalism. So I want to open with some quotes by George Jackson to give a better framework around why Africans are not fascist or don't support fascism collectively. Woo. Because, again, when people look at fascism, they think what, Nazis, or they think Antifa. Antifa just means anti-fascist. And the Antifa movement has been going way before people have been talking about it on social media. So to say that fascism it has only existed for 60, 70 years, I don't know. It's happened way before that. So George Jackson, the trend towards monopoly capital began effectively just after the close of the Civil War in America. Prior to its emergence, bourgeois democratic rule could be said to have been the predominant political force inside American society. A monopoly capital matured. The role of the old bourgeois democracy faded in progress. As monopoly capital forced out the small dispersed factory setup, the new corporatism assumed political supremacy. Monopoly capital can in no way be interpreted as an extension of old bourgeois democracy. The forces of monopoly capital swept across the Western world in the first half of this century. Corporative ideals have reached their logical conclusion in the US. The new corporate state has fought its way through crisis after crisis, established its ruling elites in every important institution, formed its partnership with labor throughout its elite, erected the most massive network of protective agencies replete with spies, technical and animal, to be found in any police state in the world. The violence of the ruling class of this country, in the long process of its trend toward authoritarianism and its last and highest state, fascism, cannot be rivaled in its excesses by any other nation on earth today or in history. That is from George Jackson. So let's discuss that. Let's dissect that, Evan. So when you hear that, what are your thoughts? Given, again, the foundation of this country was rooted in protecting the landowners, therein lies the roots of fascism, where private industries are able to inspire, to pay off, to contribute to federal decision-making policies. So we're seeing this now when everyone's saying fascism, 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 Trump, fascism, fascism. But as we've seen again with the beginnings of this society, the foundation of the U.S. And I'm gonna talk about this quote from James Madison. I'm gonna mention other quotes from James Madison if I remember, but this one I think is really crucial in terms of looking at the foundations of fascism. And people may not think, oh, this is outright, this is not fascism. But again, this is looking at the roots of fascism. So James Madison says, landowners ought to have a share in the government to support these invaluable interests and check the other many. They ought to be so constituted as to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. So that is from James Madison. So with that quote, as well as what George Jackson wrote in regards to fascism, what are your thoughts around that? Do you think that that laid the foundation, what James Madison said, to fascism? Do you think fascism is here? Do you think people are wrong saying that the U.S. is founded in the roots of fascism?
I definitely think that they definitely have the roots of fascism right there. That if you have a select number of people who control the vast majority of the land, and then they have like different ideas of what to do with it. So they either have their slave patrols or their the army, or work with the army, or they hire some like private agency. Then you definitely have the roots of fascism. I know, especially during the Trump presidency, and not just Trump presidency, but also presidents like Bolsonaro, Modi, Duterte, or even other figures like Marine Le Pen or Geert Wilders, or there's so many names they can come up with of those of politicians, as well as like gurus or other names. You probably know names. The Richard Spencers, the Matthew Heimbachs, who, if anyone knows, Heimbach tried to sort of sneak into a Medicare, something like Medicare for all rally, and then people's like, no, like he's just trying to warm back in. So, but anyway, going back to this, I think you definitely have the roots of it, and even if you're not saying, oh, that's not fashion, it's national conservatism, or it's right-wing populism, or it's a right-wing military dictatorship, or some other name, then and you do have like at least like the root of it, and it's the same, like in the same soil, that even if it might look a little different, because I think fascism has some kind of like some. I think one of the common things, regardless of like whatever definition of fascism I use, it has some kind of collective property, but in a way that's perverted to the benefit of the ruling class. It's not the sort of collectivism that we in the A-APRP or any organizations, allied organizations, talk about. It's a very different kind of unity. Like if you talk about, like, especially if whether you talk about this sort of classic fascism of like the Nazis, of the Italian fascists, or the Phalange of Spain, or so on. And one point I even saw was that some of the Ulster Unionists, Ulster Loyalists, even though even when you talk about European fascism, like you don't hear much about like Ulster Loyalism as a fascist movement. But think about it's we'll get more into it. But think about it's based upon this idea of the territory, of being like so wedded to this form of nationalism that anything that deviates from it is worth destroying, and it's all in the service of and it's all in the service of the ruling class. And even if you're a working person, or a petty bourgeois, or so on, that's all that matters. And I think on to Madison's quote as well as Jackson's point, that if you get to the point where the ruling class can pervert the authority they already have in such a way that no other rebuttal to what authorities they have is there, then yeah, it's definitely a fascist movement.
You mentioned Duterte, and I think of how the Rockefeller drug laws, for instance, or even the drug laws for the whole country, sort of matched a lot of what happened in the Philippines with the drug laws. And even if you look at what's happening in Mexico, if you look at what's happening anywhere that deals with drug gangs collaborating with the police, and you look at what's also happened in Brazil with the assassination of Maria de Franco, where she did a lot of work to support folks in the favelas, to advocate for folks in the favelas. And she was saying, get out of our communities. We understand there's a connection between the police and the drug gangs, and she was made to pay. And so you look at stop and frisk, you look at the opium fields in Afghanistan, which the US is protecting, and then you look at the connection with the overdoses on opioids in the US. So all of these things are connected, and who else is connected? That pharmaceutical companies. So a lot of these corporations are making decisions in which it benefits them because they're profiting off of all of it. And so to say that the U.S. military is going to get out of Afghanistan, it's like, are you kidding me? There's going to be private contractors. So they're still going to be protecting the opium fields because we need those drugs. We need people to continue to be sick so they can go to the hospital, and we can just profit off of that. So there's a whole profit motive behind people getting sick. And to do that, you have imperialist wars. You have all of these installment of coups supported by the U.S., supported by Europe, etc., Australia, past and present, in order for these corporations to profit. So I don't know, you mentioned Duterte, and it just made me think of all that. So to say that fascism is more or less a newer phenomenon, and somehow that fascism has ceased after World War II would be false as well. Even if you're going to the classic Mussolini definition of fascism, that is what exists today in the US. That is what exists today in Brazil. That is what exists today in other countries. The marriage of corporation and state, in which the state kind of takes a back burner to corporations half the time, if you really look at it. So from corporations funding game shows and fronting answers, and all of these things in order to sway an opinion about a particular product or a celebrity or whatever. Like, all of these things are connected, and how people are even used to sell products on the internet, on Instagram, whatever. All of these things are fused. And then you have the inclusion of the CIA spying, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So to say that fascism doesn't exist, to say that fascism is just a bunch of people on January 6th or whatever, like, that literally makes no sense, because the US government, again, has its roots in fascism, where you have a handful of, it says, landowners, but now you have a handful of people who own the means of production making decisions for policy, making decisions about laws. So to say that to say that there is only a particular type of fascism, or fascism is outwardly violent when you're seeing people rioting, capitalism in and of itself is violent. And fascism is one of the aspects that is grounded, as we keep saying, in this country, but it's also the, as I said, final stage of capitalism. I know that, then it's like imperialism, but
Yeah.
I mean, well, like, I'm gonna argue here, imperialism breeds fascism, and so it's way more than imperialism at this point. And to also talk about late stage capitalism, where everything is up for grabs to be marketed, where everything is commodified, that is also an aspect of fascism, because again, corporations are making decisions around how laws are created. The marriage of corporation and state is here. There is no doubt about it. Donald Trump was the president of the US. This was a person who had a TV show. You want to talk about corporation and state, is the Trump Corporation. And he ended up being president of the US. And to add to that, he was the outward manifestation, if you will, of that fascism. People who were like, oh, I don't know, la 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 la, the stars in their eyes are like, oh wait, I finally got what y'all are talking about. But we've been saying for years fascism is here. But people who either ignored it or somehow didn't see it for whatever reason are like, oh, we finally understand Donald Trump's a fascist. It's like, no, it's not just Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a symptom, but he's not the cause.
Exactly.
So it's some interesting time we're in. What are your thoughts about what George Jackson said?
I think what was great about what Jackson saying is like understanding that like you talk about the way that like how much like that monopoly control of the means production is like critical to it, and when you're discussing, and again, so we bring up Trump and how like he made it like his presidency make it look pretty obvious, but even before or even now, like when they're Biden, there's like vast control of whether it's from the banking industry, is from you hear the story about how BlackRock. Funny thing is that BlackRock, like there are a couple people, there are a couple people in his bureau that were former BlackRock like high ups in BlackRock. So they say that somehow like fascism is over because Biden's a little kinder in his speaking. Like he doesn't otherize as much, even though like if you see like some of the way they talk about other like, those outside the U.S., there's quite a bit of otherizing there. But yeah, so if you have that otherizing, you have that monopoly control, you have that use of secret, like basically secret police and such. You might not call, they might not say, oh, you might not do the whole I could shoot someone in Fifth Avenue and get away with it, but you still have the joint task force, you still have ICE, you still have the border patrol, you still have FBI, CIA, you still have those red squads. They might be in a different way, but they're still there. So or something as blatant as the governor of, if it was the governor of South Dakota sending National Guard because some wealthy Republican donor is saying, oh, you need some militia guys, militia people to help you deal with this border problem. Oh, okay, I'll pay for it. That's pretty blatant. same time, even those who say even those who are moderates who say they're anti-fascist, they still do some of the some of the otherizing of people in China, of Africans, of Russians, of Venezuela, of Cuba, so on. There's all this otherizing. Even if they say, "Oh, we can't stand those people who want to take away our choice," but they're willing to. But if you hear like some of the rhetoric, especially what's happening with it's not like trying to get back to normal with COVID. If you think of even the stuff you have like of vaccine, trying to get like vaccine data, like all the data for vaccine, like vaccine passports or vaccine like certification uh, or some of these things that and you think of like and you just like willingly giving all this control to corporations. You think they're going to do this for the common masses? No, they're just doing it for profit. Like if it gets people better, then that's only just a bonus to them. Like if they were able to get us all under control and no one would know about it, then they would have done it. So
Word. The next question I want to ask is, why do you think anti-fascist movements have been seen as something which is white? I think people also see being LGBTQ plus as being white. Definitely things are dictated in one way or another by whiteness, the culture of whiteness. But in terms of anti-fascism, given the solid history of anti-fascist work that Africans have done, why do you think it is still single-handedly in many ways seen as something that's done by Europeans?
I think it goes back to the idea that fascism is something that is only internal to European being, to European identity. And I think when one works by Aime Cesaire, Discourse on Colonialism, is how like there is a link between the colonization of the global South and how that ties into the fascist movements that whatever wherever the European civilization, the European progress, enlightenment, and so on, there's Hitler. So to think that somehow that it's just a matter of just a European issue. Like I'm not sure if Cesaire did it or someone else, but it's basically taking the conditions of colonization, the vast like sucking up of resources with little care for what the people who are colonized feel about it, and just applying it back in the core. I think like if you basically say, oh, we don't want to deal with that. Like it's like if you do that in Southern Africa, you do that in South Asia, you do that in Central America, then that's fine. But don't do it in London. Don't do it in New York. Don't do it in Rome. Don't do it. I think that's one thing. Like if you link it to this idea that it's about a broader it's about the broader political economy which these things are connected to exploitation elsewhere, then that brings this idea of anti-fascism to like a more dangerous point, that colonization, and especially settler colonization, it sort of implicates people in that way. And by trying to make this solely as a Euro on Euro crime, basically, I think it sort of like limits the imagination and makes people, those who as you said, who've done tons of like anti-fascist work, like whether you think about the Deacons of Defense, you think about Robert F. and Mabel Williams, her own county, or any number of anti-Klan, anti-Nazi stuff, or the national liberation movements against all these white nationalist regimes, then it sort of puts a crimp on their plans, I think.
Yeah, well, why would you want to have a monopoly on that? I mean, obviously, it's in the interest of capitalism to uphold fascism, but even those who are in anti-fascist movements don't have an understanding that colonized people around the world have fought against fascism. It's just not in the way you think. It's not in the form of Richard Spencer. It's in the form of fighting localized colonialism or gentrification. It's in the fight against police terrorism. It's in the fight against big box stores. It's in those are also ways that people are fighting fascism on the daily. And it's names people may not know, but to say, to not even include the Deacons of Defense, to not even include SNCC, to not even include all of these movements that have openly fought and discussed the effects of fascism on marginalized communities. That's like, I do want to talk about, because this is very connected to the whole thing, the recent bill that came out. I know there was the conversation around Black identity extremists that was discussed in the Trump administration, and of course, the overarching effects of McCarthyism, the overarching effects of the Patriot Act. But this recent piece of writing, this recent policy that has come up, the whole claim is that it's addressing what happened on January 6th. And I'm like, that's y'all people. Like y'all fight that amongst yourselves. Like, don't put us in that. But again, we're in it. And they say, oh, people who support fascism or actively working towards fascism, this, that, and the other. But they also include in this list of domestic violence extremists, socialists, anarchists, and people who are opposed to any type of capitalism. Something I'm paraphrasing, but they did specifically say the word anarchist and socialist. So this goes back to my other question. They also talked about animal rights organizations, and the Earth Liberation Front, Animal Liberation Front has already been on terrorist watch lists in this country. So I'm like, what's new about that? But to now say, okay, I know before they were like, oh, this person's a socialist and that, but now this is going back to really saying that I didn't see the word communism, but that's where they were going. And again, McCarthyism never went away. So they're saying anyone who stands in the way of a certain group of people, the minority of people owning the means of production, you are now a domestic violence extremist. And then they put this little bit to be like, oh, no, we're not. So they said, well, you are within your right, essentially, to oppose capitalism or whatever. That's your constitutional right to do that. This is addressing people who are actively fighting. I'm like, okay, so you have the marketplace of ideas. Why is it that people literally who have not threatened anyone on the internet have taken their Facebook page was taken away? If it's just about people who are taking action and these forces, and so to even add that, it's just like again, we understand as African people what that document means, and it's the document, again, it's under that umbrella. And because people look at Antifa organization, whatever, the Antifa organization as being a bunch of Europeans, people looking at what happened on January 6th, it's just a bunch of Europeans, and then there's a bunch of Europeans fighting them. And again, we're left out of that picture of being anti-fascist, but you know that that bill is going to affect us. So it's again with police terrorism, again with economically, it's going to affect us because we are openly anti-fascist, openly, whether it's sitting at the pool table or playing dominoes or somebody at the church is just like, ooh, so somebody's gonna let it slip, and it's like, okay, now you lost your job. Like that's ultimately what's gonna happen. And again, it does happen, and it never goes away. So somebody, that I remember that lady who was talking about, I just came from Africa, but I'm white, so I'm not gonna get AIDS or something. I don't know if you remember that lady, but she was on the plane and said it, and then so she got off the plane and lost her job. So that's what people think about when they're thinking fascist, because again, it's taking you away, like everything else, from understanding that this is a systemic thing, systemic fascism. Just like capitalism, you can make it, you can have the American dream, you can do this. And it's totally taking away from the point that capitalism is systemic and we're affected by it every day. And so, there are some people that cape for capitalism, even though they're not capitalists, but they will not tell you that they are pro-fascist in any way. They're like, I can make it and we need to have Black business or whatever. But I can guarantee you that they don't think corporations should control what laws exist. They're not going to tell you that, we should have cops everywhere and we should have tanks like they did in Oakland. Like they're not going to tell you that's what we need. They might be like, that's going to help us a little to have a business or whatever, but they're not protecting or they're not supporting a system of fascism. And I think that is the difference. And again, when you have these people that are forming these proto-fascist militias or whatever, like they are participating and protecting a certain ideology, and they understand the foundation of this country. That's why they keep going. This is our country. Right. They understand that land is power. They understand that the foundation of this country was to protect the minority of landowners, which is why they went to the Capitol and were like, oh, y'all taking that away from us? Oh, no. And, they dealt with some cops. I think it's funny. I'm like, those are y'all people and y'all don't even, okay. So, but people who are in marginalized communities are not sitting and saying like, oh, we need cops to just stand here. We need the SWAT team. Like, no, and maybe I'm wrong and there's some people saying that, but I have not heard anyone out of any marginalized community say like cops is what we need. So we just need corporations. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong and you heard that, but I haven't heard that.
I've heard that from some families. So,
okay.
Yeah. I think there's certainly the idea of, I see some people like they might have worries about whether, like, say, if they were around during the quote unquote war on drugs, was really like war on Africans or indigenous folks against mestizos, that it was a war on those people. So like they might understand like, oh, someone I know, they were hooked up, they were drugged up, so and because like the jobs like kick them out or like fire them, like they have to rely on on doing sex work. They have to rely on some doing the numbers or doing some other thing, or robbing folks, and or even now, like what happened with the opioid epidemic, or like I remember K2 was they had those ads with K2, like that's people, I know like one area near me, I see some people, there's some homeless people who they were taking something and and there's another point that about the connection, like the land question, and like you hear about like we got to do something about these drugs, and it's not, and it wasn't really about yeah, you might hear some things about getting more like social support, like homeless outreach or like more medical care, but like a big part of it is also make sure like we don't want to see these people, like they just want to like erase these people from like like you see like all these like anti-homeless anti-homeless people like architecture or you see like actually police control like I know on the same area like they cleared it out because because funny enough they're going to have a new building built there, so they want again like there is a connection between like this need to like get rid of these sort of undesirables and so like at least in undesirable way and way to promote capital, to promote this idea of we're like this land is ours, and no amount of, and even if it's a matter of like diversification of the powers, the ruling politicians, they don't want to see that. They want like white Euro control.
Like you say, your family members wanted that.
Like they say like, oh, if all these people want to defund the police, like, oh, if you're in trouble, like if like something happens, well, who are you gonna call? Or I'm like even when you do call, like a lot of times, like whatever happens, it's already done. So, and it's not like they're in our interest to like more like our interest to solve our crimes. So or they call crimes. So it's a weird thing. Like that's the thing. I know there are people who like they understand like they might have some fears, or they see like the propaganda out there in the news about, oh, so and so got shot, the kid got shot, family got shot. Like yeah, like that's horrible. Like that's horrible. At the same time, there is a purpose to making it seem like it's either we need police on like every single block, and if we don't have it, then everyone's gonna die. Like they make it seem like those are the only two choices. You don't see any kind of like, oh, there's no kind of expectation of some kind of radical restructuring, because like, if you try to say, even if you say anything that's even mildly reformative, even though it ends in like just putting more money in like police department pockets, it's like, oh, you're some kind of communist, you come out of like that, and no.
Would that necessarily be pro-fascist though? I think that seems to be, and I'm not saying they're wrong, I'm just posing this question. That seems to be more of a case of we don't have a lot of choices in this situation. This is what we've been presented: police or total crime. And so, of course, their response is, oh, what do you mean no cops? You're a communist. But I think that when folks who are colonized look at cops as a solution, I don't think they're looking at it as a way for a handful of people to control the means of production. I think they're looking at, here's our situation. Our choices are limited, even though they're not really. Police abolition is also a decision, which we believe is beneficial, but a lot of people, because they haven't even seen the potentiality of there being police abolition, so it's not even in their frame of view, because they're like, it's the same thing where people are like, well, communism never worked, so we just need capitalism, because it's like people don't even see that something going to be in their reality, when communism it's a thing to look forward to, but to say communism, it's like, no, we need to get to socialism globally before we get to communism. So people are like, well, it didn't work in these two countries, so it clearly doesn't work. So I think that's what people are thinking about when they say when we get called communist, like I'm okay. I'm just like,
Right.
like, okay, I'm a communist. Like, why is that a bad thing?
Right.
But when people call you that, I think it's because they're not looking at the bigger picture, and they also are like, well, we have a limited frame to work with, and there aren't a lot of options, and we're seeing a lot of crime in our communities. What can we do? Cops. So I would argue that that's not pro-fascist, because it's not particularly. I think people understand in the end, and maybe I'm just being optimistic. I think people understand in the end, if you're going to have a police state, it's not going to be beneficial for the people. And then when people say, oh, we need cops in our community, I don't think they're thinking police state, even though the US is a police state. I'm just saying that, and again, perhaps I'm being optimistic, but I don't think, maybe there's a few cases, and maybe that is your family. But I think overall, colonized people don't see fascism as something that's being beneficial. And again, we've collectively organized against fascism. Again, whether it even, I know people are like BLM, but even something like a BLM is anti-fascist. And I'm not, like there's some criticism, but there are some BLM chapters that are doing anti-fascist work.
Right.
So we collectively, whether again it's marching in the street to be like, stop killing us, on some level we understand fascism is bad. So yes, there's a few people that are like, but I think overall colonized people do not support fascism. So that's my counter to you. And again, your family, maybe, I don't know.
I think it's not. I don't think it's like. Yeah, I mean, obviously there's like certain people who do like advocate what if we had a black Peninsula regime or a black something like that, but I think in as far as even if it's like they have like no intent of having some kind of like police state or any kind of like sort of militarized regime, that there is sort of like I want to say maybe not unintentional, like even like any kind of either state or any kind of political body, that you don't have to have not necessarily have every single person be 100% like ardent supporters of the ideology. You still need a mass of people who are like either like semi-supportive or at least like non-committal. And I think it's sort of like, I think that sort of area of like the people they don't want 1930s, they not want 1930s 1940s Germany or a 1960s 1970s like South America or something like that. They might be like, maybe if you add a few more cops here, maybe if we got police here, maybe add like we need like harsher sentences and like this and that, like those sort of things. You don't, even if you don't necessarily say, oh, we don't want like the whole thing, you at least like expand their, at least like expand their imagination to at least accept it, and even if it comes up in a very like gradual manner, I think.
Yeah, definitely have a point. There's definitely, when you said you have a black penis, like there actually really are people who say stuff like that. And anyone who was born in the 70s or maybe at least 80s will understand the effects of fascism when you had the Iran-Contra hearing. And the U.S., again, worked so hard to destabilize a government. And so just like anything else, like, okay, we'll give y'all munitions, we'll pay for intelligence or whatever, you just protect this thing over here for us. And then you have the Sandinistas who's like, woo, you know, like let's get rid of it. You know. And then what happened? You got crack in the hood. So I think anyone who has a cursory understanding of how the government installed crack in the hood should understand on some level the effects of fascism in our communities and how U.S. policy affects what happens internationally, and just the connection between what happened with the Contras and crack in the hood. It's like how can you say, well, I don't care what happens in this country or that country, whatever, it's not here. It's like that's like your taxes go to destabilize Palestine, to steal land. Your tax dollars went to install crack in the hood. How can you not have an understanding around how fascism affects everyone in this country on one level or another? And I think for me, that is one of the things I think about. You think about how it affects marginalized people, colonized people. Crack in the hood was big, and then the government say no to drugs. Y'all saw crack in the hood, and Nancy Reagan talking about say no to drugs. She also said ketchup was a vegetable, but that's a whole other thing. But you had this whole anti-drug campaign, and yet you were installing drugs in African communities, and then you had DARE, which was ineffective.
Oh.
So yeah, you install all these programs which are meant to not work and to be beneficial for people who are suffering in one way or another. And then you have Rockefeller drug laws, and you have all these things and stop and frisk, and to not understand how there is a connection to fascism there, be it internationally or domestically. I don't see how anyone could, who is a colonized person, support fascism in any way. And again, per your example, it's possible there are people who are like, yay. And yeah, again, there are people who are like, yeah, I want to be a black Bill Gates or, you know, black Jeff Bezos. I'm just like, okay. But yeah, so there are people who support, and I don't even think they're consciously thinking that's fascism, where, you know, Jeff Bezos being asked to sit on the board of the Pentagon. Like, Jeff Bezos, Amazon, like the behemoth corporation, being there to contribute to making decisions that happen in terms of the military. Are you kidding me? So So I don't think when people say I want to be a black Jeff Bezos or I want to be this, that, or the other, or colonize Bill Gates. Huh?
Or Elon Musk.
Yeah. So I don't think they're thinking about how Elon Musk contributes to labor exploitation. I don't think they're thinking about how the Gates Foundation's connection to assuring people are not in the best health around the world. I don't think that when people say I want to be this, that, or the other, again, maybe I'm naive on this, but I think people are directly thinking about that's the amount of money I want to have,
right?
As opposed to, yeah, I want to create policies that affect it. I just don't think people are thinking that far. And again, maybe I'm being naive about it.
I mean, I see some. Oh, we have a little more. Like, we have a little more data on it, but I think there is some need for power that comes with the wealth. I think some people, like, even if you hear some wealthy people or those who are clicks for wealthy people, there might be some people, like, if you didn't say who wrote it, you might think it was some Marxist or some other kind of person who's like study or some study Marx or Nkrumah, Ture or some other like radical left wing person. Like you hear that like the way they talk about class consciousness, about the need to protect, and so you think, wait, you should hear this. Like, this is some billionaire. It's not some. It's not. It's not someone like fighting in the forest like with a communist militia. It's some wealthy person is like talking about class in this way,
Right.
and that's another point about like fascism, that it's about like even like general capitalism has it's like the seeping of ideology of the wealthy to the populace. I think like fascism sort of like a revolution to like this a revolution by the wealthy to make it so that any kind of like disdain towards the ideology is like forbidden. And the funny thing is, if you talk about even when we talk about the classic like Marxist classic forms of fascism, and so like Germany, Italy, Spain, so like there are powerful forces like a good example being in Germany. If you know about the company IG Farben, which was like which is I think one of one of the like breakoffs from that company is Bayer. So like they needed someone to say, oh, like, we want to make sure that our profits are guaranteed. And well, you got some people who like fight for it. Like they might push you aside a little more than you want, but again, you want some people who are willing to do whatever it takes to like guarantee that wealth. So, and if you need someone in church, someone in a mosque, someone in a synagogue, someone in the temple who's willing to co-sign it, then you might risk them wanting to get you and like have control over you, but at the same time, you rather that than the people who want to take either a part of your wealth through taxes or the whole of your wealth or most of the wealth through redistribution, seizing your assets to nationalize and collectivize. So you rather the former than the latter.
Yeah. And the funny thing is that Bayer currently owns Monsanto, and we understand what happened with Monsanto in relation to the destruction of Vietnam. And then there's the current class action lawsuit that's been back and forth, where people are like, I got cancer because of your product. So yeah, it's funny how these corporations, they want to maximize profit at the expense of people's health, at the expense of the health of the land, at the expense of just well-being. Like, so it's also funny because you want to talk about Martin Luther King, and I want to have this quote here in regards to extremism, because Martin Luther King's analysis got way more fine-tuned after Letter from Birmingham jail, but he did talk about extremism here. And like, so he says, so the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice? In that dramatic scene on Calvary's Hill, so of course, he was a reverend, so he had to use this example. 3 men were crucified. We must never forget that all 3 were crucified for the same crime, the crime of extremism. 2 were extremists for immorality, and thus fell below their environment. The other, Jesus Christ, was an extremist for love, truth, and goodness, and thereby rose above his environment. Oh, I think, I don't know if you saw the dude who he was a gang member, and then he turned his life over to Jesus. He's Jesus Christ, Jesus Christ,
Oh yes.
Jesus Christ. I was like, okay. I just think about that all the time. Jesus Christ, that's right, Jesus. So I'm like, yeah. And so even that, just with talking about drugs in the hood, and you look at, people talk about Crips and Bloods, and there's dialectics to everything. But even with people in gangs, they understand the conditions, and so a lot of gangs are formulated based on those conditions. But when there's something extreme that happens, it's like, okay, we got a truth. So even there's an understanding there, because it's like, oh, our community, oh, this affected all of, okay. So they called Martin Luther King an extremist, even though, he's getting sold now, content of character, all this. But his analysis fine-tuned to be one that was anti-imperialist. And he heavily critiqued capitalism. So if Martin Luther King were alive in this day and age, he would be on that. I mean, he already was, but he would still be on that watch list. So for people to be like, oh, Martin Luther King, and all these people in the government be like, Martin Luther King was a great man, but at the same time, y'all don't talk about his anti-capitalist analysis. Y'all want to go back to 1963 and do like content of character. What? No.
Yeah.
He said capitalism is inhumane. He talked about white liberalism. He talked about imperialist war and how that was connected to what's happening in the hood. So for people to whitewash his analysis, to whitewash the activism he did, and then to continue this manifestation of fascist policy is just like, wow. So you said Martin Luther King was anti-fascist, certainly was. But, according to the U.S. government, he's, domestic violent extremist. Even though he was just like peace and I'm, non-violent to the very core. But I understand why people defend. That would have him be called a domestic violence extremist.
Right.
Even though he's just like, no, non-violence is the way I prefer. But still.
And speaking of nonviolence, we were speaking earlier about the recent the bill or like memorandum about in response to January 6th, that with regards to animal rights, environmental rights, like that. I think it was also would cover the indigenous land and water protectors, and for the most part, and obviously there's like some exceptions, and we're not criticizing them, but for the most part, they're actively doing so in a way that they don't hurt anyone. They're not violent against anyone, and they still see it as terrorists. So terrorism isn't just a matter of, oh, they hate us for our freedom, they hate us for our democracy or something like that. It's because they're affecting the profit margins. When you go after the mass agriculture, you go after their extractive pipelines and so on. You're affecting their ability to have their control over the land, over the nature, over. And I think another point, as far as anti-fascism, Africans as anti-fascism, is another point I think talk more about is about the control of African bodies, especially of those of African women and African marginalized genders. That a big part of fascism is making sure that those who are not part of the few who are part of that nation or whatever, if they're born, then they either have to be enslaved or taken care of, and they have to make sure they can't have control of whether they want to have some children and so on, or take care of children. So, and then that's another big part that, again, we're talking about for ancestors, that African women, African marginalized, African marginalized genders, they're a big part of that anti-fascism as well. Uh, yeah, like we do talk about like a self-defense of like black bloc or like doxing of like fascists and so on. Like yeah, that's a part of it, but also like having autonomy their over their bodies is a big part of it. I think that's something we go on about.
Let's really get into the meat of anti-fascism, and can't get into total meat. But you mentioned the Black Bloc, and having been out in the streets with folks who are Black Bloc, so I know that there's a lot of European folks who are in Antifa groups who do put their bodies on the line for colonized people.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that as well. Do you think that is a huge component as to why folks who are Antifa are targeted? And I'm talking about European Antifa folks.
Oh, big time. I think if like even if they do have like there's certainly like contradictions with like for a while among like European settler like anti-fascists who like they have like, all the issues on like regards to the relation to colonized people and so forth. But I do think that, but for Europeans who are do like militant anti-fascist work, who do like the animal environmental militant environmental animal rights work, who do all those sort of things that they I guess they're seen as like basically traitors. They sort of like take like saying, oh wait, they're not fulfilling their sort of like the settler agreement to the extent that they should. So if we're okay, we gotta do something about these people, or else that's like more on the if they get some of us, especially here in the United States where the population is larger than the colonized population. If you have any of them like realize and like reject that settler position, then that puts those in the ruling class and those who are really deputized as settlers in a bit of a bind because we got to deal with these people too.
But given that anti-fascist movements and organizing is far from a new thing, why do you think this conversation has come up? I mean, even in this country, there's been anti-fascist organizing. Right. Obviously, like if you want to go to classic Nazis, but why do you think that there was a lull? I mean, obviously not in our communities, but a lull in the general populace, in media, etc. And now it's like Antifa. I mean, Antifa has always, been around since the Bolsheviks. So, so why do you think in a lot of spaces it's being spoken of as if it's this new phenomenon, like, oh, Antifa is the organization? And again, let's just repeat, Africans have been doing anti-fascist work. So what's up with this mention as if it's a new phenomenon?
I think a lot of it is like the way that like so much in news and like popular media gets like if it's not part of the like general general phenomenon of the general history, then a lot of things that might seem like to come back or are relatively new get sort of like particularized to right now. Like you said, I think you not only see with like anti-fascist work, but also of the militia work as well. Like the militia people, the neo-Nazis, the Klan, like the white nationalists, and so on. Like even they get sort of particularized to now, even though like if you watch stuff from the 70s and 80s, I even remember from like the '90s, there was a lot in the news, especially of course like Ruby Ridge and Oklahoma City bombing and stuff like that, and what happened with some of some lynchings in the late '90s and so on. That again, like that stuff is new, and not to mention like the Pat Buchanans of the world, or like the bell curve, like when you're hearing about it like right now, like we were hearing right now as to like Trump and or like before like Obama presidency, and you're like, wait, I heard this before, but they make it seem like it's, unless you like watch some like really partisan news, they make it seem like it's something new. And I think it's done to like make sure like if we don't have that history in such a way, then we can just like get guided around as like just react. Like it was like Kwame Ture say, like capitalism does a lot, like makes people to just react to everything. And I think that's a big part of it. Like if you like simply develop that reaction, like the reaction to stimuli, then you can't get like full grasp of like, okay, what's the root of it? And then people who do or get to the root of things, whether their analysis is correct or incorrect, or they at least they attempt to, then they get looked as weird.
Yeah. And to your point, Kwame Ture says capitalism is based on a lie, and when it tells the truth, that means it's a double negative, something like that.
Yeah.
And I want to actually discuss one of the biggest forms of anti-fascist organizing, if you will, the revolts from people who were enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to talk a little bit about what Frederick Douglass said. Oh my goodness. So what is the slave to the what to the slave is the 4th of July? This is written in 1852. The fact is, ladies and gentlemen, the distance between this platform and the slave plantation from which I escaped is considerable, and the difficulties to be overcome in getting from the latter to the former are by no means slight. That I am here to say today is, to me, a matter of astonishment as well as gratitude. You will not therefore be surprised if in what I have to say, I evince no elaborate preparation nor grace my speech with any high-sounding exordium. With little experience and with less learning, I have been able to throw my thoughts hastily and imperfectly together, and trusting to your patient and generous indulgence, I will proceed to lay them before you. So yes, I think Frederick Douglass, was obviously someone who was enslaved and did learn how to write and read, but I don't think that's what's important about this speech. What is important is, again, having an analysis in regards to the foundation of this country. You can say all you want, Abraham Lincoln and signing this and that document, but Jim Crow still existed. Why is it if humans are considered full humans that you had to have poll taxes? Why is it you have to have these ID laws? Why is it they had to finally in the 60s and the 70s fix housing discrimination by policy, in which it still wasn't fixed, still not fixed?
No.
So to talk about, well, he said some 5 and 10 cent words, it's just, no, that's fine and everything, but the analysis is what we should be paying attention to. And it is this, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national, and he notice he says your national independence and your political freedom. This to you is what the Passover to was the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance and to the signs and to the wonders associated with that act and that day. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life and reminds you that the Republic of America is now 76 years old. I am glad, fellow citizens, that your nation is so young. 76 years though a good old age for a man, is but a mere speck in the life of a nation. 80 years and 10 is the allotted time for individual men. The nations number their years by thousands. So if no one's read this speech before, I am suggesting you read it. This oppression makes a wise man mad. Your fathers were wise men well. And if they did not go mad, they became restive under this treatment. They felt themselves the victims of grievous wrongs, wholly incurable in their colonial capacity. With brave men, there is always a remedy for oppression. Just here, the idea of a total separation of the colonies from the crown was born. It was a starting idea, much more so than we, at this distance of time, regarded. The timid and the prudent, as had been intimated, of that day were, of course, shocked and alarmed by it. So yeah, you got a gang of people that organize, because you can't have a revolt that's successful unless this is organized by a group of people. And they said, we want to get rid of this monarchy for ourselves, so we're going to go somewhere else. But what did they do? Instead of being like, yes, we want to be free, and so we're going to be in this land and, celebrate our freedom with other people who are on this land, what they do? They said, oh, yeah, we're going to commit genocide, and we're going to enslave a bunch of people, and we're going to profit off this land. We're going to be a bunch of landowners, and we're going to have Declaration of Independence. Like, so please read this. And then there's another piece by Margaret Kimberley, and you can just either look up July 4th Margaret Kimberley, or it's a piece in Black Agenda Report, and it's called The Terrible Origins of July 4th. And of course, July 4th, Africans were not liberated in this country. Nope. So Africans celebrating July 4th, I'm like, okay. Even like, oh, we gonna have a cookout. I'm like, by proxy, you were celebrating this day in which you wasn't free. We still not free as African people. And you're like, well, July 4th. I'm like, okay. So what she writes is, the ruling didn't end slavery in British territories, and in fact lasted in those regions for 50 more years. But even this narrow decision was too much for white Americans, who feared that the crown might undermine or even end their right to slaveholding. Bam, there it is. The ongoing effort to subdue native peoples created more conflict with colonial settlers. Virginia's royal governor, Lord Dunmore, joined colonists in encroaching on western native lands, and he incited the short-lived Dunmore's War of 1774. But the marriage of convenience was short-lived, as the crown sought to keep the settlers under control by seizing their stores of gunpowder. The Battle of Lexington and Concord was just one result of this conflict over armaments. In Virginia, it ended with Dunmore taking refuge on a ship offshore in 1775. From that hiding place, he hoped to manage people who were determined to do what they wanted. He declared martial law, threatened to burn Williamsburg to the ground, and declared that enslaved people would win freedom by serving in the King's Army. Some 800 of them did just that and formed what became known as the Ethiopian Regiment. White settlers were in a constant state of fear of slave revolts, and Dunmore's actions meant to keep them in check only heightened their determination to run the country without British interference. So again, even the foundation of the US was like, oh, Africans are still, it's just like, so it's all about the foundation of what is known as the US today is still protecting a minority of people to maintain this system of power, to maintain this system of ownership. And why are Africans celebrating this? And I had the day off. I'm like, can we have a little bit of an analysis about this? Like, don't be like, you're a communist because you don't celebrate the 4th of July.
Yeah.
I thank you. Like, what's wrong with that? Like, so by proxy, by your silence, you are celebrating your enslavement. And again, I know, oh, you're just ruining the fun or whatever. It's like, we have fun, just not that kind of fun. Like, you don't enjoy the fun we have. We don't enjoy your kind of fun. But to be like, well, it's a day off. That's the same thing with MLK Day. Well, it's a day off, but people don't continue the work that Martin Luther King did. And Martin Luther King Day is the only holiday honoring someone who's African. And it took a long time to get there, but everyone's like, whoa, it's a day off. So people don't even have this understanding around context or about why we do not celebrate these days. It's definitely not just a day off to people who still have these 1776 flags. I know that. It's not just a day to people who were there on January 6th. So to say it's just a day off for African people, no, it's not. It's a day on to continue to fight fascism. That's what I thought. I don't care what anybody says. It's not, oh, we cook out and just, no. It's another day to fight harder against fascism.
Right on.
Fine, I'm gonna have a cookout. Get out of here, please.
And yeah, is it? And another point is like we talk about like the original anti-fascist was fighting against like the slave revolts, the Quilombos, the Maroons. That like you want to talk about like like we're sort of big up the traditional like European style anti-fascists, but you got like and you gotta look at like those slave revolts. Like hell, look at like, Haiti. Like we talk about like ultimate like overcoming of it. Like obviously it didn't solve every single contradiction, but you talk about like getting rid of revolt against other entire system of it. Well, like, look at that. I know I talk about Haiti, but come on, you can't talk about Africans. Like I'll talk about the liberation of Africans without talking about like Haiti. If you do, then I'm sorry.
I mean, it's because of people who were on Haiti fighting and having slave revolts that you had the end of enslavement in the first place. So it's like, oh, and of course, you know, people said, well, we went to Canada. I'm like, Canada? Yeah, the same treatment of indigenous people. You're talking, oh, Canada's great.
And you gotta look at what's happened recently. All those graves being found, residential, I mean, not just like all that's in past. Like the last residential schools closed in the 90s.
Yeah, and just the legacy of the Quilombos in Brazil is just still dealing with housing issues. The descendants, and there's a hard fight, and so they formulated a political party and were gaining steam. So it's just like people are organizing, and it's funny because you have all sides on the political spectrum are like, let's get rid of Bolsonaro. As fascism is increasing in different parts of the world, you have South America, Central America, they're like, yeah, we're not trying to go there. So yeah, Lula definitely, you know, again, contradictions exist, but people are definitely supporting Lula, because at the very least, you could say, okay, Lula was part of the people's movement with unions and stuff like that. So people are seeing that kind of thing and like, well, you know, and again, contradictions, but
you talk about Haiti and
right right
there.
Oh, we could go all day on that with Lula and Haiti, but increasingly we see that Central America and South America are going towards that pink tide, if you will. So there's still even, you look at Peru, they're like, yo, like, why y'all still trying to get in here? It's just like the Marxists, you know, so it's like, they're still trying to get in, and they're like, okay, what can we do to hold on? Should we like plan for another coup. It's like Castillo got most of the votes. It's like whether or not you support him, yeah, he's a Marxist, but he did get a majority of the votes. So, and this is happening again across the global South, where more and people understand the conditions. It's just like we colonized people cannot take it anymore. And so either Marxist or socialist or on some level communist. It's happening, y'all. It's happening. Like capitalism is on its last leg, and we're seeing that, which is why they're clawing harder to maintain it. But we're seeing it, and the more you have countries in the global South turn to socialism, it's like the more you're gonna see the weakness of capitalism. Again, we're seeing it, but I'm talking about outside of us. And I really do think people are starting to see it. To your example earlier about like, well, we need the police to protect our communities. Is that now more and more people are seeing on the internet, it's like, oh, this is how police are. And even with all the police in the country walking away because one of their people got convicted, it's like, oh man. Yeah. So people are really seeing the effects of the police state and how it is crumbling. So the fact that it is crumbling, what do? Community defense, that is a solution. So it's not like we have nothing. No police, we have nothing. Like that literally makes no sense because there's a historical precedent around how community defense works. And so if you want to talk about the Panthers, if you want to talk about the military wing of Aime, if you want to talk about the Deacons of Defense, like
LA.
Right. So so this actually works. And again, there's a historical precedent for that. And even if it's the smallest thing to having a military wing, fascism has always been fought by colonized people around the world. And it's just like, oh, y'all gonna start cruising our country? Oh, we saw what happened with Chile. We saw what happened in Ecuador. We saw what happened in Haiti. We saw what happened around. We see what's happening in Brazil. We don't want that. And more people are fighting back. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And Africans need to really understand that, you know, we are around the world. It's not, we're not just here. When you talk about enslavement, people focus on that, and FBA. 2
billion of us.
Huh?
Yeah, there's 2 billion of us. So
right. So we obviously have to be around the world, and these politics affects all of us. It affects indigenous folks, it affects colonized folks around the world, and it is not just a class struggle; it is an ideological struggle. It is a struggle we need to wage daily. And if it's, you know, addressing that with our family members, with our friends, with just people we care about, and even people at our jobs or whatever. And it's so funny because I already talked to, I'm just going to say this on the episode. I was talking to my cousin who was taking care of me. And so she came out with it first, talking about July 4th. It was like, yeah, that's not our day. I was just like, oh, okay. And she's like, yeah. And I was like, so we started talking about it. I was like, the only thing that you should be doing that day is burning the flag. She was like, yeah. So people, I think, inherently who are colonized have an understanding of, again, there's this whole thing like, oh, capitalism. But there's something inside of us because our ancestors are inside of us. So we have an inherent understanding that these things don't work for us. They don't work in favor of us. And they honestly don't work in favor of the masses of people, regardless of how we identify and who our ancestors are. They really don't work. So, so for James Madison to say, well, the landowners should be the ones who get to say so, you know, at the expense of the masses. I mean, they're literally telling you what their objective is.
Yeah, exactly.
They're literally telling you that. So there's some other quotes though, which I think is really interesting, and they kind of contradict themselves as well. But he also says oppressors can tyrannize only when they achieve a standing army and a slave press and a disarmed populace. So who's the oppressor though? Is the oppressor, according to James Madison, the masses? On some level, yes. But an enslaved press. I mean, this is what's happening now, though. And so to say this is a new phenomenon, or again, 67 years old, this is hundreds of years old, where government did dictate what happened in the press and vice versa on some level. So, and it also says, which I think is interesting, if our nation is taken over, it will be taken over from within. I'm like, So why is it that y'all are focused on Muslims, that y'all are focused on some other country? Obviously, it's to steal resources from those countries, but this idea that they're coming to do this, that, and the other. I'm like, if our nation is taken over, it'll be taken over from within. So you got all these like white supremacist militias. I mean, you could look at it that way. Crisis is the rallying, huh?
Yeah, like you talk, and as anti-fascists, they talk about the three-way fight. There's that three-way fight right there. It's not just against. One thing we talked about right after the sex is that it was basically a fight between two sections of like the settler regime. Those who want just a little more sprinkling, there's a little bit of giving the gifts of the settler colonial empire to like give a little bit to some of the masses, and those who just want to make it either exclusively or mostly European. And it's like we're not doing any we're not going to do any land attributions. We're not going to do any welfare. We're not going to do any of that. We just want a male centered settler European centered settler regime. Basically.
Yep. And even though a bunch of the people that were there on January 6th were the business class, they still don't own enough of the wealth to be protected. The government said, y'all on our territory now, we ain't going to protect you. I mean, in sense, like white supremacy is protected, but in terms of the masses coming together, it's just like, oh no, like y'all coming to threaten us. Okay, y'all could go in somebody's neighborhood and do that, but now y'all on our territory. So it's just like.
Yeah, I think also like gains into the separation between any kind of separation between parts of the bourgeois class, like either those who they're accepting sort of the international like free trade order, and those who want if you think about it, you see a lot of if you look at a lot of the fundings for think tanks, for military militia organizations or other things, you see a lot of extractive industries. You see manufacturers. You see some venture capital. You see certain aspects of capital there versus some who are more willing to go free trade, go wherever the money takes them. So, I mean, that's another point. We talk it's ours, but yeah, are you talking about ours as in you, or are you talking ours as in Google or
right?
Are you talking about Wells Fargo?
Right. James Madison also says crisis is the rallying cry of the tyrant. And he talks about the Constitution too, which is really funny. Says the purpose of the Constitution is to restrict the majority's ability to harm a minority. And I know that's been interpreted in different ways over the years, but it's very clear he meant landowners, because he straight up said it. And then people are like, well, things have changed. And no, it hasn't. Because, again, if anything were to change, then you wouldn't have corporations participating in federal decision making. You wouldn't have corporations being able to create policy, or you wouldn't have something like even the quote affordable healthcare, which was far from affordable, but who did it? It was a bunch of people in think tanks, and then it was folks who headed corporations. So the Heritage Foundation is a right-wing think tank, but even though Obamacare, I'm like, a right-wing think tank is like, hey, let's have. It's about still making sure insurance companies get the bulk of the profits. It's still about that. And you're paying $500 maybe, and you're not making any money, maybe it's subsidized, but if you look at like $500, I remember when I had to get that, because if you don't get that, you have to pay a fee. And I told them I couldn't afford that. It was either that or my rent. And the lady straight up was like, well, I don't really care about that. You just have to pay. I'm like, oh, yes. So it really wasn't about protecting people's health. It's just like, well, you got to pay up. I don't care if you don't have a house to live in. Like, if you don't pay it, you're going to have to pay when you do taxes. Okay. So it's like, so it's still protecting the minority. And even, corporations being considered people in accordance to the Constitution. I'm like, that tells you right there. Come on, people. It says, knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who need to be their own governors must arm themselves with power which knowledge gives. I think that's an interesting quote, because what does capitalism do? It makes sure to assure that people are ignorant. It's like, if you question anything in school, you go to the detention office. If you look at anything outside of U.S. News or the BBC or NPR or whatever, which is funded by corporations like Cargill, oh my goodness, you're a communist, still get called a communist. So so knowledge will forever govern ignorance. Like, that's funny. Of people who need to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power which knowledge gives. And so again, I think if James Madison is consistent, this is that the few who own the majority of the wealth are the ones who govern that ignorance. I really think that's what this is about.
Yeah. And so about the ignorance, and what I was saying, the ignorance about the sort of people that that the so-called free nation supports, or like the gathering of the democracies, like the sort of people we support, they support. There's some people you look at it like, oh God, these awful people, like the Suhartos of the world, the Mobutus of the world, the Pinochets, the Videlas, the Somozas, the Duvaliers, like also kind of people. You think, oh yeah, yeah, freedom, yeah, like. Yeah, so much care for women, so much care for the poor, so much care for workers or peasants, and so much care for the lumpens and so forth. Like, yeah, and anyone, and like Africans especially, or anyone, whether they're internally out or externally colonized or fighting against that, like, what?
Yes. Oh, Papa Doc and Baby Doc. Mm-mm-mm. He also says, our Constitution represents the work of the finger of Almighty God. Separation of church and state, I guess. I don't know. So I'm going to read a few more. It says, democracy is the most vile form of government. But this is a democratic country.
Well, it's not democracy, it's a republic. Look.
This is democracy. This is democracy. But according to James Madison, democracy is the most vile form of government. So again, anti-communism, it's just like, it's protecting the minority. It's just like James Madison is so consistent. Says, no era is more certain than the one proceeding from a hasty and superficial view of the subject. Even though, again, that's what capitalism promotes. It's like hasty and superficial view of things. And then this one is the one I wanted to say for last. A president is impeachable if he attempts to subvert the Constitution. So all these people who created a parasocial relationship with Donald Trump, who said, he lost, he needs to be in there again. And then they threatened Pence, saying, come on, you need to do it. He's like, I can't violate the Constitution. But Trump and all these other people wanted Pence to violate the Constitution. So a president is impeachable if he attempts to subvert the Constitution. So wouldn't that be an impeachable offense according to James Madison?
Yeah.
So, hello, America. Yeah. So I did want to say those quotes. I think he was pretty consistent with what we are still seeing today. The minority of folks who own the means of production around the world are the ones to make the majority of the decisions. And it is up to us to have that ideological discussion, build an analysis, and organize for the masses so we change and flip that over and make sure the end of capitalism will be there for future generations. It's not going to end in our lifetime. I mean, they took centuries to build it up. It's not going to end in 2 seconds. But we're seeing what James Madison is saying. We're seeing what all these other people are saying. And this didn't just start with Donald Trump. Like, so we have always been anti-fascist. And so we gave some examples. We hope that you study more of those examples, but it's really important to understand that land is power, and this is an ideological struggle that we need to wage. It's not just an economic struggle, because the land is what has the resources, and that is what they're stealing. This is what they're trying to protect for their own means as the world is starving. It's like, oh, how come y'all say Africa's so rich, and why are Africans so poor? It's like, because Africans don't own the means of production. That's the 10-second answer. So to demonize fascism, to me, it doesn't show an understanding that colonized people have been anti-fascist from the beginning of the stealing of land. It doesn't have an understanding that, to the smallest degree, whether it's protesting police terrorism, to outright being like, yo, like there are many facets to it, but to not have an understanding and to just say, we hate Antifa, like, what does that even mean? So, Evan, have you actually had a discussion with someone who says, like, I hate Antifa?
I've seen people do that. I remember someone trying to rebut, like just pointing out that Antifa or Antifa is short for anti-fascism. For whatever reason, they try to differentiate between anti-fascist. Oh, but they're not. It's not Antifa. I'm like, that's the stand. That's what it's not stands for. But so what? so so I've been.
Yeah, I don't think I've had anybody personally tell me if people, but clearly I've read a lot of commentaries that are like, okay. And the last thing I want to talk about is the connection to patriarchy and fascism, and this idea of militarization, this idea of this fight against Antifa as being like, yeah, this is what we need to do to protect our country because we're strong men or whatever.
Yeah.
And, we need to take care of our women, protect our women. And the funny thing is, a huge component of people who do anti-fascist work are women and trans people and non-binary people and people of marginalized genders. And yet people who protect fascism, from what I can see, want to uphold patriarchy. So let's talk about that connection.
Yeah, a big part of like a fascist ideology is the idea of like this sort of like not just masculinity, but this very very specific, very like hyper masculine, hyper militaristic form of masculinity that we have like and I think I'm not sure if it was Roberto Eco or like someone they talked about the connection between the also when we're the book Patriarchy and Accumulation on World Scale, it mentions Mies mentions this the sort of like tie between like the militarist, like this necessity of patriarchy as the hunter, the warrior, is like warrior for the sake of being a warrior, not for any kind of protection, but just for just accumulating, just taking from everyone and anyone like that. How that's tied to fascism, and as mentioned earlier, the control of birth and making sure that your people are getting or being produced more and more, and those other like don't, and like how that's like patriarchy and making sure that any kind of even if you see like say women, like say the women of the Klan or some of these or not like Nazi women's groups or so on, that even if they have some kind of like interest as women, they still do it in a way to make sure that it's their men and that they do so, and so like to support their like control of the households, because the household is controlled, then that's sort of like the organicist view of like people are the body, and like the women are a certain part of the body, and the children is got like, oh, we got to take care of the birth rate, like they talk like the birth rate and make sure we're good, and so on.
And even with fashion, it's really funny because people talk about vegetarianism as having a connection to fascism, or you want to make everybody this, that, and the other. And in Germany, vegetarianism was seen as being something which had a moral compass because it would help to uphold our standards, Aryan people, whatever. When this idea of, and I know people use it on different sides, this idea when talking about a set of ideas, and I think when you have a strong analysis, you're going to talk about it everywhere. You have a strong analysis, you're going to say, this is what we think is going to work. This is a solution we advocate for. And then, especially if it's anti-fascist, it gets called fascist. People are like, oh, PC culture, fascist. And again, people don't have an understanding of when you use a word like that so cavalierly in a cavalier way, it really does take away what actually happens under fascism. And again, it really erases the experiences of colonized people under fascism when you use things like that in that way. And that is how Jamilah looks at it. Like everything else, the experiences, the analysis of colonized people tends to get erased. You're just a fascist, because again, European sensibility dominates ideas in schools, in even discussing socialism, or anarchy or whatever. People don't talk about Africans who are anarchists. People don't talk about Nkrumah Tourism when it comes to socialism or communism. It's just like Marx, Lenin, whatever. Bakunin. I'm like, so so yeah. Still, even with that, even in anti-fascist circles, Africans and colonized folks around the world get erased, and then they end up calling other people fascists. And then the people who support fascism are like, well, you're fascist because you want everybody to be vegetarian or whatever. So it becomes this thing which is still dictated by European sensibilities and ideals. And I know I said that the other thing was the last thing I was talking, but I really do want to get your ideas on that.
It just made me think about the use of woke as a term of like, they're trying to impose the woke theory on us, or they're using wokeness as a mask for this, or even though we it's been like for Africans, it's used to like understand to recognize conscious gain consciousness against us, is like the mental mess that colonization has done on us, and then it's used to sort of say any kind of recognition of that is somehow some like totalitarianism, some kind of fascism. And if there's mention that whatever they're talking about, most likely it's just capitalism, just doing its usual recuperation. And that's nothing else. Or like if you say like some words like green imperialism or pink imperialism or like black imperialism, like something like that, or it's simply doing so in the service of that structure, or like the sort of like decaying structure that's trying to just like try to stay alive in some way. But it just it irks me for one. And another point is again the point is like the people have heard the term of feminazi. They somehow if women somehow want to or marginalized people want to hey, we're tired of our labor, our bodies, ourselves being used as a space to be used and abused and exploited, and somehow some form of feminism do or are done in the service of the settler regime, except for colonialism. But having said that, they still, even within the bourgeois spaces, it's still a matter of, hey, they're still like, hey, we don't want we want to have some say, and anything like that, let alone a full inclusion of the role of imperialism, fascism as an anti-feminist space is let alone doing that, then that's putting a question for people, and that's scary for some.
Mm. You made me you made me think of one other thing, and I want to address this real quick. Bill Cosby. I don't want to get too much into it, but the subjugation of women. I think this is a really important thing to talk about, and I don't want to get too much into the case. Okay, he admitted in a sworn deposition that he did these things to people. What happened was that it was a sealed deposition. The attorney was like, okay, make a deal with you that you was it on account of like doing a settlement or whatever, just do this deposition or whatever. And he did the deposition, but the dude ended up quitting. There was another attorney that was like, whatever, we're gonna open it, whatever. So that ended up violating his Fifth Amendment right. So that is what happened, not the fact that he is innocent from what he did. And so people need to stop saying Bill Cosby is innocent. He is a serial assaulter. He has acknowledged doing it. He has talked about putting the Spanish fly in people's drinks on his records in the 60s. So he has acknowledged that he's a serial assaulter. And to not address that, even though, and Felicia Rashad talking about miscarriage of justice, it's like, I'm talking about internalized patriarchy. That's one thing, because she was asked about, you said, forget these women. She said, well, no, I was misquoted, but it's not about that. It's about how this man's legacy is tarnished. So you ultimately are saying, forget these women, because women were violated and you're worried about this dude's legacy? Like, what? Excuse me? And so she just got appointed to be the dean at Howard of the art school, which, interestingly, which is another reason why I wanted to bring this up, because it's a school that got reestablished, named after Chadwick Boseman. And of course, everyone loves Chadwick Boseman. I've only seen him in the Black Panther movie, which I despise. We've discussed that in another episode. The CIA was the hero. So I love that they named the building after him. And I'm just like, I'm only looking at it from that framework. It's like pro-CIA movie, Chadwick, so that, But so she is worried that Bill Cosby's legacy is going to be tarnished. This is the legacy that Bill Cosby left. And this is from the Pound Cake speech. He says, are you not paying attention? People with their hat on backwards, pants down around the crack. Isn't that a sign of something, or are you waiting for Jesus to pull his pants up? Isn't it a sign of something when she's got her dress all the way up to the crack and got all kinds of needles and things going through her body? What part of Africa did this come from? We are not Africans. Those people are not Africans. They don't know a damn thing about Africa. With names like Shaniqua, Shaligwa, Mohammed, and all that crap, and all of them are in jail. Brown versus Board of Education is no longer the white person's problem. We've got to take the neighborhood back. We've got to go in there. Just forget telling your child to go to the Peace Corps. It's right around the corner. It's standing on the corner. It can't speak English. It doesn't want to speak English. I can't even talk the way these people talk. Why you ain't going where you is go, Ra? I don't even know who these people are. And I blamed the kid until I heard the mother talk. Then I heard the father talk. This is all in the house. You used to talk a certain way on the corner, and you got into the house and switched to English. Everybody knows it's important to speak English except these knuckleheads. You can't land a plane with why you ain't. Why not? I don't know, anyway. You can't be a doctor with that kind of crap coming out your mouth. There is no Bible that has that kind of language. That's not true, because they made a Ebonics Bible. So where did these people get the idea that they're moving ahead on this? Well, They know they're not. They're just hanging out in the same place. 5 or 6 generations sitting in the project where you're just supposed to stay there long enough to get a job and move out. So this is the same dude that did Fat Albert. So he profited off of the language he's now critiquing. Think about that. And we could get into all day. We ain't from Africa. So this is the legacy Bill Cosby is leaving. And I remember Jamu telling a story in 1984. I think this is when he joined the A-APRP. So or maybe a little before that, but I think 1984. So he went to see Bill Cosby. This is around time of the Cosby Show. So Bill Cosby is speaking. And so people were like, yay, Bill Cosby, you know, it's like he's doing some good for the Black community or whatever. Bill Cosby's like, whatever, I'm American. So this is the legacy Bill Cosby is leaving. Plus, he is a serial assaulter and worse. So Felicia Rashad and other people are talking about protecting this legacy. Like, what ancestors is he honoring? Because your ancestors are African. And this is not our original language. So to attack people who are fluent in a language it's not natural to them, to attack people for that, it's like, that's the legacy Bill Cosby is leaving behind. So he is protecting the oppressors. And, you know, people were talking about, oh, well, you know, people want to attack Bill Cosby because, you know, he's Black excellence and he wanted to buy NBC. The thing about that is that NBC was actually not up for sale. So he was just like, I want to buy NBC. They're like, what are you talking about? Like, it's not for sale. So this whole thing he was trying to buy NBC, no. So people are talking about Black excellence or whatever. And this is the problem with capitalism. It gives you this illusion that, you know, somehow you're going to be accepted by the oppressor if you speak a certain way, if you earn a certain amount, if you do this, that, or the other. So another thing, even though Bill Cosby was openly anti-apartheid, so he's not African, but, you know, he supported the struggle for African people to fight apartheid. So I don't know, did he separate himself from that? I don't know. But one of the discussions that came out of this was a huge percentage of people in Azania, aka South Africa, who watched the Cosby Show and loved it, were European. And so there were class lines that people, they saw themselves being represented through this class of the Huxtable family. And Africans were like, yo, you know, like, we have finally seen some people who are African who are successful, da da da. You know, they have pictures of Mandela up. The grandkids were named Nelson and Winnie. And then, so, you know, they had these sort of superficial alliances with African people. But here's Bill Cosby saying that he's not African. So it's just like, okay, that's the thing to do with South Africa. But one of the critiques was the economic apartheid aspect, because majority of Africans could not afford the life that the Huxtables had. And so that wasn't just a critique in Azania, it was a critique here. It's like, it's not a reality. You don't have a parent who's a doctor and a lawyer. And it's just like, I don't think that's the biggest critique of the Cosby Show, but that definitely was a critique. It's just like, okay, the parents are a doctor or a lawyer, you know, it happens occasionally. But I think the Cosby Show had bigger problems than like the doctor and a lawyer parent, you know. And this was another thing with the first season of the Cosby Show. And I'm the same age as Keisha Knight Pulliam. I think we're the same age. And so the first season, nobody remembers this except one person that I know. The first season, Bill Cosby was talking to Theo. He said, Theo, I'm gonna beat your ass. And I think they either cut that episode or that scene, because nobody except, again, one person I know remembers that. I don't know if you've seen the first season and you saw it, but I only saw that episode once and remembered that stuck with me, and I was a kid. And he said, "Yo," he said. So this is Bill Cosby. So, and even using, the jazz legacy and the like scatting. Is he saying scatting's not English, so don't do it? I mean, it's the jazz framework, which comes solidly from Africa. So too, or you're just talking gibberish. Like, what's this? Like, are you going to tell that to Ella Fitzgerald? Are you going to tell that to Duke Ellington? Are you going to tell that to Dizzy Gillespie, who was just like rolling up in Cuba? Like, so I'm just like, this is, to me, that pound cake speech, and that's what it's called, the pound cake speech. That's the legacy of Bill Cosby. And to me, he's just like, well, this is who I am. I could get away with all of this. And not to mention the colorism of Bill Cosby, because the majority of people who said he assaulted them and worse happened to be European women. The African women who did say he did these things, were not our hue, but the majority of people, and some of them, were obviously, darker than the European women, but there's definitely a type that he attacked.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for Bill Cosby, it's just like, well, I'm on this status. I'm Bill Cosby. It's like, I'm not black. I'm OJ. It's just like, it's that kind of thing. And so he thought, he was just like, yeah, I could get all these women or whatever. And, I'm sure some of the women were like, oh, I had a positive time, but it's clear the ones who came out, it's like, oh, they're lying. It's like, I don't know that, but all of them can't be lying. So even if it's one person who said you did this, one is too many. So don't focus on, oh, they're lying, but one is too many.
Exactly.
And so that is the legacy of Bill Cosby. He thought that, I'm Bill Cosby, so I could do whatever I want. No, Bill Cosby, you found out you was an African man. That's who you are. And you want to deny that. And then when the conviction got overturned, which is funny because he went back to Fat Albert. So he, as I said before, he instinctively knows he's African, and he's attacking people who don't speak English, but he goes, hey. I'm just like, okay, Bill Cosby, Mr. Pound Cake. So that is Bill Cosby's legacy. And I haven't really heard people talk about this aspect of his legacy. People focus on like women are lying, this, that, and the other. But this is his legacy. And this is a man who he was a serial cheater on his wife and had a child outside of that marriage. And he's talking about people not getting married and having kids. It's like, didn't you do the same thing? Who are you to talk? So that is the legacy of Bill Cosby. I'm going to shut up. I want to know what you think about all this. And then that's really what I wanted to say.
I think there's someone I followed on Twitter. Her name's Nina Monet. She had a point where about not just about Bill Cosby, but also Sha'Carri Richardson, about like all sorts of like Africans who they face the issue of you might be great. Oh, we'll celebrate that you're part of the you're beyond color or you're beyond this. Like we'll celebrate you, but at some point you're gonna realize that you're African. But at the same time, that like people who like us, or people who are revolutionary and understand that we understand the aspect of our of the expectation of Africans of this capitalist system. At the same time, like if someone who faces some similar issue, but they live someone who lives in your hood, someone who lives out in the field, or someone lives in the country, and you don't give that same respect. Like like to what extent are you really like to the extent do you really like want to tear down the system? Like, are you doing it because you care about their Africanness, or you care about them because they're a celebrity? And there's a great point that a lot of times they and like yes, like there's this and like there are sort of like divides between like the petty bourgeois in these or those who have this status. At the same time, at some point you have to realize that yeah, even if you might that trying to sort of like that while you understand the racial, economic, social situation in those situations, like while you understand it, trying to like if it doesn't then like translate to it won't translate to what you're facing because it's just like oh you just like some kind of elitism. And I think it's a great point that while we're right to understand like oh they're attacking people like they're attacking like Osaka like Naomi Osaka because she doesn't want to do interviews, or they don't want to attack these runners because it's deemed to be too masculine for some like arbitrary reason, or isn't that like in the end like obviously like they have their struggles they have to overcome. At the same time, is that gonna at one point is that gonna free us? Like the fact that we get so tied into it is in itself a victory against like some of these things, these mechanisms where another thing she pointed out it sucks that someone won't be running in a big event in the Olympics, but then you take the Olympics in general is like a very like a hyper capitalistic nationalist event. Everywhere it goes, it does a number on the government structure, that does a number of like displacing people and then all sorts of issues of politics of oh should we go to the Olympics, should we go or not, and it's it gets like it sort of like gets us to ignore the roots of it, like you know, and I think to try to tie it back to the point about like our Africans as being anti-fascist, I think it goes back to like people remember the boycott of like the 1980 Olympics in Moscow because the USSR in Afghanistan, and sort of a counter boycott there. But one thing to remember is that in 1976 there was a boycott of the Olympics in Montreal, and guess what? It was boycotting. It was boycotting. I believe it was the New Zealand settler colony, like the All Blacks, who went on a tour, and one of the places they went was South Africa. And many African nations like, no, well, we're not doing that. And it's funny, like, like you hear like recently about, should people should they go boycott the Olympics in Russia, or the upcoming, or back in 08, or and the coming Winter Olympics in China, like should we boycott, like should nations boycott that, and so on. And like one of the earliest ones was against that apartheid regime in South Africa. And I guess the other point, like I go a long way, like talk about the relation between us. Like, if people know me, I'm a big sports watcher. But I also understand that there is an aspect of, if not like outright fascism, like there is an aspect of the sort of the nationally uber nationalist sensation when sports teams, the sort of putting all into an individual or a team. This like rejection of people because they're playing a rival team. This like sort of yeah, and it's like people as much as I have my critiques of Noam Chomsky, I think he made a good point about like why he's like a big sports guy, because like it's a big prep for that sort of like fascist set of sentiment. And
Yeah. But then there are people like Dave Zirin who, obviously, it's all about sports, but has a political analysis when it comes to discussing sports. So, yeah, I think that there's definitely a balance. It's
Mm-hmm.
to talk about the merging of the state and corporation. I mean, the fact that at some point along the line, they had the military come in and be like, okay, y'all got to put your hand over your heart and be like, oh, say, can you see? I mean, that's literally like the merging of that. And
Yeah.
you can look at that as an aspect of fascism or fascism and something. And then with Sha'Carri Richardson, the first thing when I heard about all that I thought about was Jesse Owens. Because, so not just even the notion of the patriarchy when it comes to policing her body and being like, well, she's a man. And then they fully misgender Florence Griffiths join her and be like, well, they're on drugs. And it's just like, now y'all attack a Flojo. She's not even here, but okay. And so they're like, oh, well. And then, banning African women for having too much testosterone. And it's so much. And then Caster Semenya. So it's a policing of African women consistently when it comes to racing. And then, in terms of Sha'Carri Richardson, being in the LGBT community, so people caught her out there, well, you put this stuff on social media. I mean, like, if men were pink, then you gay. And it's just like, yeah, but you're also okay. But so there's that internalized patriarchy with her. And then she said something about Lil Nas X, but it seems like she has an issue with people with cis men who are outwardly feminine, I guess. I don't know. I haven't had a conversation with her, but according to the post, that's what it seems like. I don't know if that's an issue, but that's something that we as African people should struggle with her over. Like, it shouldn't be this thing where she should be banned from racing, and then like we have to struggle with her over the issues of internalized patriarchy. If that's what she has, just it seems that way. And then just the policing of African bodies when it came to someone like Jesse, they can run faster, and the Nazis in the Olympics versus this person who just can't outrun everybody. So yeah, it also made me think of that and the policing of bodies in terms of fascism. And then you also talked about the depopulation or eugenics, if you will. So I mean that's another aspect of it. But policing in terms of using pseudoscience to make these generalizations about African people in sport, and then being like, well, we tested and you have too much testosterone or whatever, and it's like so I mean all of that is connected in lots of ways. And so, see, you say all this stuff, and then it makes me think of something else. I'm like, oh.
It's just, again, our understanding our African history is vital to understand that a lot of terms you might hear regards to fascism, anti-fascism, and so forth. Understanding that it's not a certain idea that you presented, whether it's of the idealist left wing perspective or some sort of horror, sort of some kind of doomsday right wing or centrist perspective. That is something that's consistent with our colonization and the fight against it, our enslavement and the fight against that, our liberation, the fight against anything that stands against our liberation. That it's not simply a macho thing. It's about all Africans against the subordination of children, exploitation of children, the control of African women, their bodies, and marginalized identity. The idea of African men as something to be eliminated and consumed and so forth. So all that is like the fight against fascism, and by obviously just not obviously simply existing is a win, but obviously as like part of an organization of fighting for the liberation of people, that doing so is a key part of it. That if you're organized against it, that there isn't one specific way you have to be involved with. You don't necessarily, like, if you want to go black bloc and like, because there's some gang of like pigs or police or militia people and Nazi whatever, and you think you can battle against it, go right ahead. If you want, if there are like other ways, like helping those who have control over like the resources of land, because like one thing I mentioned in the previous episodes, how often like fascists and other organizations like right-wing militias and will attack the means of your food and such, so for protecting the food you have, the place you live, and so forth. That's informed about anti-fascism and so forth. Like lots of methods there. So again, understand the history, understand how it can apply for what's happening right now, like the way it evolves from whether at somewhere where the issue is like some corporation or some big man or big woman who owns like big plots of land and they're working on, and it's just like a lot of people just working on it, or the workplace or in a mine or somewhere, like wherever, like the battle against all those forces is against fascism and anything that leads up to it. So keep doing that. So I think that's it. Any other last words?
Join an organization. Join
Yes.
an organization. Say that every single week. If you are really, really looking to fight against fascism, you gotta do it in an organized way. That's the only way. Can't do it by yourself. So A-APRP is an organization. There are plenty of organizations you can join to do that. And we also have our fellow comrades who do podcasts. This is not the only one.
Yeah.
So we have our comrades in the New Mexico chapter. They do a podcast on Thursdays, every Thursday. And then we have the Revolutionary African Women. They do once a month. They just had an episode on Kwame Ture, because Kwame Ture had a Earth Day celebration or Born Day celebration.
Yes.
So there were a lot of things going on with that. And we have our comrade Shakura and Ajamu. They do a weekly webinar. And then we have our comrades who are on the tech committee, and then they do a podcast. So there is plenty of things you can look for the A-APRP doing this work in terms of spreading this information to you. But all we ask of you is to share this information, but not to just share this information, but join an organization. Because as it said, organization decides everything. Thank you, ancestor Kwame Ture. And you get up in the morning, what happens? You set your alarm clock to go to your job. You organize your life around things that you like to do. Why not organize your life around the people's liberation? Exactly. Make that something that's a part of your life, because it's about most important right now. So that's what I got to say.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So thank you. Thank y'all so much.
Yes, thank you. And again, as Comrade Jamilah said, listen to the podcast, listen to our podcast, listen to any interviews, discussions, webinars, whatever, of organizations you might want to form, or if none of them interest you, you always form your own, as we also say. And again, organize, because the enemy, whether wear a sheet, whether wear a badge, whether they wear a suit, whether wear whatever they wear, they're going to organize themselves. You talk about those lone wolf, but even in those cases, they're part of some organization. So even if they tactically do something different, they're still an organization. So you got to do something however you want. So however you can. Well,
Right.
thank you again for listening to Pantsula Podcast. Forward ever, backward never.
Forward.